I'd love to say, yeah, it's been easy, it's been really straightforward, but it hasn't. There's been another knock-on effect in my mental health, just kind of trying to find my purpose and, again, who I am, how I define myself.
Welcome to the Tales to Inspire podcast. Before we get started on this episode, I would like to invite you to our community so that you can hear more stories to inspire change within your life and positive change within the systems in which we live. All I want you to do is to click on the subscribe button. Your comments mean the world to us with anything that's resonated with you, and I absolutely love your support. I can't wait to go on this journey alongside you. Thank you so much for subscribing. Let's get into today's episode. Today we go into a deep dive with Pete Barty. As a little trigger warning, Pete does talk about his own mental health journey and the struggles that he has been through.
I'm Pete Barty, and this is my Tale to Inspire.
So, who are you? Where are you from? If you'd like to introduce yourself and we'll go from there.
I'll do the best I can, Chris. So my name is Pete Barty, or Peter, if I've been told off by my parents. I am in my early 50s, and I am originally from Kent and went through school, all boys grammar school. Didn't really fit in with the academic side at that point in my life, just about scraped my A-levels and went to university down in Hampshire. And I came out with a master's in civil engineering. So then embarked my 28 years, 6 months, 10-day career in civil engineering. So I ended up doing quite well. I was on a graduate training scheme and I became a chartered engineer, ended up managing at times 300 people, huge budgets, looking after the highway network within Hampshire. Really proud of that time. The bits I take from that is how much I love working with people. Yeah, I'm an engineer. I was never going to be the best engineer, but what I tried to do was be the best person I could to relate to other people and get the best outcome. People are our best resource. So that was until last March, where I was medically retired. So there's a big bit of story that leads me up to there. Okay. So just over 14 years ago, I was having some health issues in my shoulder. I was suffering a lot of pain, a lot of traumatic pain. And I kept going back to the doctors, kept going back to my GP, and wasn't really getting anywhere. So eventually, after some repeat visits, I got referred to a specialist, and I had ultrasound, and then as the clock turned, an ultrasound, then an MRI, and something was not right in my shoulder. So I was then there was clearly something in my bone. So I then went for a biopsy, which was a painful needle through my bone to take some samples of whatever it was. The consultant said, the chances are this is benign, it'll all be fine and we'll sort it out. But there was something niggling in my head that, at every point they've said, oh, this is nothing, we've kind of gone down the other path on the sliding door. So it was November the 16th, 2009. I sat down in my consultant's office with my wife, and they had the results of my biopsy, and sat there with two nurses from Macmillan. And as soon as I walked in and saw two Macmillan nurses, I kind of thought, this suddenly doesn't look benign. They're not going to be there for, reasons that are normal. So they sat down, and I can remember my consultant's word. He cut straight to the chase. He said, this is bad news. You've got primary bone cancer in your shoulder. It was a very rare form of bone cancer, but he said, and it could be fatal. This could spread from your shoulder elsewhere, and it could be life-threatening, or it is life-threatening. So I can't really remember the next few minutes. I kind of put my head in my hands, as you do. I think I swore a few times, and I had this picture of just staring into an abyss. We had a young child at the time, my wife and I. She was 1.5 years old, and I was petrified, absolutely petrified that this pain in my shoulder could kill me. So that was on the Monday. We were ushered out of that room, and we sat with the Macmillan nurses for probably, it seemed like a long time, but it probably was half an hour or so. But they were wonderful. They were really, they held our hands and, emotionally talked us through what was going to happen, because I hadn't really heard much of what was going on in the consignments room. Didn't fill us with false hope, but just said, let's do what we can. Let's get through this. So that was one Monday. The following Monday, I was on an operating table. I was in my mid to late 30s, and I think I pretty much jumped the queue because it was so advanced and so life-threatening. So the next thing I know, I'm in hospital. I'm getting prepped for surgery and going to surgery. And what they basically did was remove half of my upper arm bone as it goes into my shoulder. So all that's now from kind of there down to here is now steel. Loads of muscle loss, which they just had to remove. All the ligaments have gone. It's left me with an arm that doesn't do everything it was designed to do originally. So I have a disability, and that then took 6 months of rehab to give me some sense of normality in terms of what life was. That was in November. So my wife is a teacher, so we kind of rolled into the Christmas holidays, and that was okay because family were around, my wife was around, but then, like all holidays, that came to an end, and there I was strapped up in a sling. I couldn't move my shoulder. It's fairly limited into what I could do in terms of dressing, washing, looking after myself. And so my wife Helen went back to work, and it's suddenly cold and lonely. I'm sat on the couch watching endless films, which got a bit tedious. And I without doubt went into my own first kind of foray into a mental health dip. That I was faced with my own mortality. I'd been given no definitive outcome for what was going to happen. And we're just going to let me recover from the surgery before we then looked at what else was needed. So I didn't know whether I'd be around in a year or so's time. So throw into that mix, when we got home from hospital just before Christmas, my wife sat me on the sofa and told us we were expecting our second child. There was quite a lot going on in my very simple head. Really confusing time for me, and it was really difficult to get everything lined up and straight. At the end of the day, at that point, I was still an engineer, and I like to have everything black and white and lined up. I'm less so of that now. I'm very different now, but I like to see a path through, and this was really quite a challenging moment in my life. So hence, my mental health took a dip, and that's my first encounter with a therapist.
When you say your mental health took a dip, is that typically joyous occasion when you're told you're going to be a father again? It was kind of like, I'm not going to be there for this child. How is this going to work? What kind of a father? I
just didn't know how to process that. I'd been home a day or so, sat on the couch trying to process what had happened the previous 2 weeks, because that had all been so fast and so rapid. From diagnosis to surgery to getting home was a matter of 2 weeks. Okay, the lead up to that diagnosis was 4 or 5 months while my GP tried various things. But that was like an absolute thunderbolt, an absolute roller coaster in 2 weeks, to then be sat at home thinking, okay, now I've got to suddenly process what's going to happen with my shoulder and my life, and then suddenly to be told we're going to have another child.
I can imagine your wife being like, do I tell him now? Do I not tell him? Like, what do I...
Yeah, but I mean, there's no way she was not going to tell me.
Yeah.
But it actually just made my processing really more complex. And I think that's the point when everyone had gone back to work and got on with their own lives and I was left to kind of process my stuff. I think that was when I found it. I don't know what to do with it. I need to talk this through. But it wasn't until another probably 2 or 3 months that I actually found the courage to go and talk to someone. So I'd been in this dip for a while. But that at the end of the day, I'm a male, so I'm going to try and fix it myself.
So when you say you was in this dip for 2 or 3 months, are you kind of just feeling really down and just like hopeless? Are you like self-harming? Are you not speaking to your friends? Are you being like, what's this dip for you?
It's a really low sense of mood. So really low mood, low energy, no motivation. What's the point? I don't know where I'm going. This could all be a waste of time. Very short with my wife. Because that was pretty much the only contact I had. Friends would come round and visit very briefly. And I'd do my best to be pleasant to them. But it's those closest to you to usually take the brunt of what's going on. So it wasn't very nice to be around, and I recognised that. But it took a while. I thought, actually, no, I need to do something about this. It's not who I want to be. It's not fair on Helen, my wife, and it's not fair on my 1.5-year-old.
Yeah.
Not to mention an unborn baby.
Yeah.
I look back at that time as there's two elements to that. I look back at that point and feel really sad that I was like that, but I don't necessarily regret what's happened because it led me on a different path. Everything happens for a reason. I don't know where I'd be if that hadn't have happened. I was probably on a road to extreme stress in my job, with a lack of perspective and be really career driven. So I'd have gone down that path, and I think I prefer the person I am now to the person I might have turned out to be. So I went and saw a therapist. So that's now 13 or so years ago. And that sat with me for a while. And that had a big impact in terms of allowing myself to go in a room. I think I cried for the first 2 sessions, something I hadn't really done. I think it allowed me to just see things, how I could manage myself to make things more bearable at home. And it was at that point about coping mechanisms and what behaviours could I bring myself to do that just made things more comfortable for everyone at home. It's an incredibly stressful time, getting a diagnosis, and I'm not unique, there's millions of people get that news every year, and everyone will deal with it differently. But we can only deal with the story and we can only deal with our own process.
Yeah.
So that then led me to, because where do we go from there? So I'd had a really positive experience with my Macmillan nurses. They were amazing and they supported me, not just while I was in hospital. There's another, the particular nurse that I became friends with is another Helen, and we're still friends today. So she was really supportive, helped me with appointments, did anything over and above that you would expect someone that was really empathetic and cared about you, demonstrated care above and beyond that I would really have expected. So I kind of took it upon myself to kind of repay that debt a little bit, that care and that empathy that she showed. I wanted to do something meaningful to pay that back. So then I started, once I was able, I started trying to get fit again, because I'd been sat on a couch for 6 months, which, I'm a body type that doesn't really help.
And you like being active, right? That's kind of...
Well, I did before, but this I needed to do something just primarily to get fit, because I'd not been able to do anything for 6 months.
Yeah.
So I started getting fit. I started doing a bit of running, and all in my mind with a view to doing something which would be quite big for me anyway, to kind of do a fundraising effort for Macmillan. So a bit of running, it was Great South Run, Great North Run, and then another half marathon, and then I was scheduled to climb Kilimanjaro with a friend, which apparently I'd talked about in hospital with him. because he sat at the end of my bed and we talked about it, but I have no memory of that whatsoever. It's amazing what morphine can do.
It's amazing what your friends can do as well to pretend that something was discussed.
Yeah. So apparently I did have that discussion, but I don't really have much memory of that. But yeah, a lot of painkillers and a lot of drugs. So yeah, we climbed Killy, and that was an amazing experience. And I raised a stack of cash for a charity that I felt very dear to, and that carried on. So it was Kilimanjaro, then it was London Marathon and a few other marathons. Then I went to Nepal and trekked to Everest Base Camp. Then back home started doing ultra marathons. A few of those ran from London to Brighton with some crazy ultra marathon friends, and then went and climbed Toubkal in North Africa. First time I'd put crampons on in my life, just to see how that would work before then going back off to Nepal and climbing 3 big 6,000 meter peaks in a month, which was the hardest thing I've ever done. Really, really exhausting. I think I lost 2 stone on that trip just from being at altitude for that long. And the money's racking up and the money's rolling in, for a charity that I felt very, very close to. Then I went to Argentina with a friend I'd been to Nepal with to climb Aconcagua, which is just under 7,000 meters, one of the 7 summits. And that was another month. And on summit day, I got hit with altitude sickness and turned around probably about 45 minutes from the summit, which was devastating. All of these little challenges I'd kind of set myself. I was driven enough, and fortunately enough, there's an element of fortune in there, injuries and altitude and all this kind of stuff, that I'd done them all, I'd achieved them all.
Are you doing these as well? Are you doing them out of enjoyment of running or hiking? Or are you doing it as, this is quite difficult to me and I'm putting myself out of my comfort zone? Or is it solely out of gratitude that the best way you can do this is to support Macmillan? Like, what's your reasoning behind it?
Great question. And I think that there's a mix in there of all of that. There's an element of maybe trying to find myself a bit. Maybe I didn't quite know who I was. So this is now who I am. I raise money for Macmillan. And I push myself. I train, which gives me a purpose and a reason to get out the door. And I go and climb things or run things. My relationship with running is very interesting. Do I enjoy running? I don't think I do. I really enjoy finishing, and I really enjoy the sense of satisfaction afterwards, but I'm not sure. I enjoy the company if I'm running with others, but I'm not sure I quite enjoy running, but I do it. Or I did it, sorry. There's an element of I want to perhaps be a role model for other people that are going through hard times, inspire them to actually maybe think I can do some stuff that's a bit out there.
Would you have done any of this stuff if it wasn't for your shoulder?
No, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't, because I had a book on Killy. I bought that probably 10 years before I got diagnosis, and it sat on the bookshelf. If I was going to do it, I'd have done it.
Yeah.
When before kids, I'd have just thought, I want to go and do this. This sounds great. Yeah. But I didn't. So maybe it was stuff about actually this is who I want to be. But that's a great question. Why did I do all this stuff? That's probably a bit about trying to make my family proud.
Just to make sure, was your shoulder okay after that surgery? As in terms of, had the cancer gone?
Yeah, good point to kind of track back on that. I had scans every year. I had to have repeat surgery the following year purely because the mechanics hadn't worked. So not cancer related, but the mechanics of my shoulder hadn't worked. The placement of the ball on the end of my arm bone had slipped, so it needed to be reset, and another mesh, and they moved one of my pec muscles. They kind of cut it and strapped it across there to keep it all secure. It's quite a complex joint, your shoulder, probably one of the more complex joints. But I was scanned for 11 years. And I was really fortunate. When I went in, they thought I was going to have radiotherapy, but the surgeon was fairly confidently got it all subject to scans. So the first year I had scans every couple of months, then it went to 6 months, and then after I think 4 years or so it was every year. So scans went on, and I was really fortunate that there was a few things on my lungs they kept an eye on, but they just turned out to be small anomalies that weren't really
Amazing.
considered troublesome. So I was really lucky. I've no doubt that another 6 months or so it would have spread elsewhere, and it probably would have been too late. The time most people find out they've got bone cancer is when it's spread everywhere else, and they find the secondary cancers. And I don't think I was that far away from that. So yeah, good point. Tracking back to that, got carried away with mountains.
No problem on this podcast getting carried away with mountains, mate. So obviously you're going up all these mountains, you're doing all these challenges. So where does your journey go from within that, and I guess in keeping with everything we've been talking about with your mental health, and is it like when I do my challenges, I fall off the edge of a cliff, metaphorically speaking, when I finish a challenge, because I'm like, right, like who am I and what's the reason for life? Like, or is it actually, you've got these constant challenges that you're doing and you kind of found your purpose?
I think the post-expedition dip is quite a common thing. I was not immune to that by any stretch of the imagination. Just speak to Helen, my wife. She recognises that I'm quite difficult in those few weeks, probably a month after I'm back. What's interesting is all of these things I've done up until Argentina and Aconcagua, I kind of knew what I was doing next. Almost, you get to the summit or you get past the finish line, you're already thinking about the next thing. So there was no point where really you'd sit back and think, yeah, that was brilliant. Yeah. I just need to kind of sit with that, let that kind of bleed into me and become part of me, immediately started thinking about the next thing. But with Aconcagua, that was different because I didn't summit. So what I did do, I spent a lot of time thinking about what that meant, what failure was. Yes, was it a failure? Yeah, we can have that. That's another discussion for another time maybe. But what I ended up doing was learning more about myself when I didn't summit, about what that meant to me, who I was, and actually what's the worst that can happen if you go for stuff. You actually try and stretch and push yourself. What is really the worst that can happen? I learned more about that in not reaching that summit. More reflection in that turning round than on any of the things I've done before. So for me, that was the most valuable expedition of the lot. And you could say it was a failure. And I got back from that, and I journaled quite a bit of that. I then went for a job, a job within my employer that I had no right of getting. I just thought, you know what? What's the worst that can happen? And I got it. And it was great. It was a temporary job that there was probably someone who had his name on the seat already, and we ended up sharing the job because they couldn't split us, which was a great experience for me to do something that just mixed things up a bit, gave me a different label rather than the one I'd had for the past probably 10 or so years.
Yeah.
Opened a lot of doors and left me with a better path forward in my career. And I think I've adapted that, what's the worst that can happen, since then. Certainly an element of that. Not just in my work, because like I say, I'm medically retired last year, but in other things that I might not necessarily have done. Doing things because you don't necessarily know why, but you don't necessarily know why not.
Yeah.
Like this.
Yeah.
Let's take this for example, Chris. I mean, if you'd have said to me 2 years ago, you'll be sat in a studio in Manchester having a chat with Chris Patel about your story, I'd have probably laughed at you. You think, well, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But actually,
why not?
Why not?
Yeah, exactly. You can't get out now, the doors are locked, mate. You're going nowhere. So then you talk about being medically retired last year. How does that all come about? Is that what you wanted? Like, what happens with you?
It was... So my shoulder had been stable for probably the 10 years post-surgery. And then slowly I was suffering from quite a bit of pain in this area. Now, when they did my shoulder, it was quite a new technique, quite revolutionary. 20 years ago, they'd have probably just cut my arm off and said, see you later, crack on. Maybe I'd hope with a little bit more empathy than that. But so this was new. They had no data on how I was going to perform this type of joint. And slowly over those years, and probably to some respect, my job was desk bound. So I'm sat at a desk on laptops, looking at a couple of screens. That position probably isn't doing my shoulder any good. And so the joint itself started to migrate and move around from where it should be, and that was starting to impinge on nerves. So the nerves were being compressed, and that was leading to a lot of pain. And there wasn't really a way out of that. I've got to a point where I've just got to try and manage that pain. And I know what makes things worse. I know what makes things better. So I just have to live my life slightly differently, and medicate myself where I need to. It was a real. It's a real kind of gateway moment in my life. You know, like I said at the start, I'd been in that employer from a graduate to the role I was in, and the relatively senior leadership role I was in for 28 years. I'd been there 28 and a half years. It was who I was. And now suddenly, in my early 50s, I'm kind of set adrift. What do I do now? Who am I? Mm-hmm. I'd love to say, yeah, it's been easy, it's been really straightforward, but it hasn't. There's been another knock-on effect in my mental health, just kind of trying to find my purpose, and again, who I am, how I define myself. And it's been quite a long process that I've really struggled with lack of social contact, and I've had to manufacture that. And that's a really important part of mental health, is your social health.
Yeah.
The longest study on happiness done by Harvard, it's been running for 80 odd years. One of the main outcomes of that is the people that live their happiest, longest lives are those that have a really, really high quality, deep and meaningful relationships and social contact.
Wow.
You know, so I'm aware of this stuff, and I'm thinking, here I am sat on my own with a dog, which is lovely. You know, I love our lunatic spaniel, but it's not necessarily how I get a deep and meaningful social contact with others. So I have to work at that, and I think that's something all the time when not in a normal standard work environment, I'm going to have to work at that. But I think that's something that maybe people that work at home need to think about anyway.
Yeah.
So there is an element of where does that go? Where am I now? So I took the decision to go on a trip down the Mississippi with Dave Cornthwaite, who I know you know.
So Dave's actually one of our ambassadors. So he shared his story a while back, and that's how we met. So we only met. So it feels like we've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
But we only met in June of 2023 at the Yestival, which is the amazing event and festival that Dave has with the Yes Tribe at the Big Sky Hideaway. Mm-hmm. And that's where we met. Your wonderful daughter was playing football then. I think we got chatting about something, and I don't know how it all went along. But yeah, sorry, carry on. And that's how you decided to
nice to reminisce about sunnier days.
I know, days that don't exist anymore. But and then that's where you decided, essentially, that I guess, was it at there that you decided you're going to go down the Mississippi?
It wasn't, and I'm quite a reflective person naturally, so things tend to germinate with me, and I have to sit with them and reflect on it for a while. But suddenly I thought, why not? Yeah. Rather than rather than looking for loads of reasons why I should do something, I just thought, why not? So I signed up for that, and I didn't, other than Dave, I didn't know anyone on this trip. I thought that's a really good opportunity to just be myself and try and spend some time thinking about what's coming. What I want to be, what I want to do, who I want to be. Who is the authentic Pete? And that's quite a hard question for anyone to answer. And I think I turned up to that trip not wearing any masks. I think I was quite authentic because I didn't know anyone. I'd There was no expectations on me. I wasn't an engineer. I wasn't a leader in the public sector. I wasn't a therapist. I wasn't a dad. I wasn't a football dad. I wasn't a dog owner. I wasn't a husband. I wasn't anything of those things. I was just turning up as me and trying to be authentic as me. And that was a really amazing time. It's a beautiful environment anyway, but I went for reasons other than canoeing down the Mississippi. I went for reasons to try and find something about myself. And you never know when that light bulb moment is going to come. But it did for me. There was a moment where we were. I have to be careful for the mic when I go on this trip. I don't want to give away what happens. But there was a moment where I just suddenly I realised there was stuff I was carrying around. I've been carrying around for a long time. I'd done all this stuff. You know, up until in my late 30s, I'd worked really hard at my career. And I'd done all these challenges, and it was all doing stuff. You know, there was no time there to be me. You know, I'm a human being, not a human doing, and I think it was time for me to try and define myself by who I was rather than what I did. But there was something sticking in there for me that was preventing that. And what I came up with, and it was just stood on a riverbank when something was happening amongst the group, this group activity. I was just carrying all this anger about what had happened to me, about things in my life, even pre-cancer, but certainly post-cancer, what had been taken away from me. And I'd buried a lot of that because we're on this narrative that anger's bad. You know, and you have to suppress it. And even I, as someone that's had shed loads of therapy, this was new. And you never know when that light bulb moments, that insight, that revelation is going to come. And here it was on the banks of a river in Memphis. Who knew? And it was really quite emotional. And there was a big emotional release for me in that moment. And I kind of, without being too cliched and maybe a bit touchy-feely, I felt I let something go on that river. And that was really valuable for me. And I shed a lot of tears at that moment. And it wasn't just, well, I don't know what it was, but it was a lot of release of major bits of my life that have shaped me to where I am today.
And this was only in
October
of 2023, right? So it's not.
We're not even 3 months ago.
No, exactly. So not long ago. And what have you taken from that?
Like with anything like that, I've let this stuff go, and I now need to let the rest of me reform. Because this has just been almost ripped out of me, and I'm really glad to have left it there. But it's now reforming. And I feel I'm on that path. It's not straightforward. No change process is linear. You know, there are ups and downs, and I still have bad days. But I think I've got a clearer idea about who I am and what I stand for, what my values are, than I did before.
What are those values?
I don't necessarily want to be someone that does X, Y, and Z.
Right.
I want to be represented by the way I am,
right,
not what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to be open and authentic, vulnerable, because we're all human and we're all vulnerable, and not hide that, to try and help others. And it all sounds very cuddly and altruistic, but that's where I feel I come alive.
Yeah.
If I can have a conversation with someone and I feel a deep connection, that leaves me buzzing.
Yeah.
And it's not with everyone. You know, we don't click with everyone. But I know when it happens. I look back on the last 3 or 4 years and I can pinpoint times when I have felt the most alive, the most buzzing. Mm-hmm. And it is usually down to connections with people. It's who we are. You know, we can do all that stuff. But as soon as you've done it, it's gone. It's in the past. Whereas a deep, meaningful relationship stays with you.
So then let me ask you this question then. not everyone has the opportunity to go down the Mississippi or go up Kili or even do a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
I'll
challenge you on that one.
Well, how do people create the opportunities for them to have discoveries like you have?
Dave would hate this because I'm going to say yes more.
Dave
would love this, but I'm hating the fact that I'm able to say it. But there's this bit we don't know where this stuff is coming. You know, we don't know what we're good at. We don't know where we're going to get this moment of insight. But if we stay in our comfort zone all the time, the chances are it's not going to come. It's through those moments of exploration and those moments of new experience that we find out about ourselves. It didn't have to be on the banks of the Mississippi. Mm-hmm. I just needed time with my authentic self, without those masks, without that baggage, to get to that realization. It just happened to me that it was on the banks of the Mississippi. I don't think it had to be there.
Oh. The one thing that environment probably created is it created a time that you had, mm-hmm. a space where you could be your authentic self, and the opportunity.
Yeah.
There was no other hassle or anyone else coming in. It gave you the opportunity to really have that moment. And I guess if you was at home and you said, all right, Pete, you've got 3 weeks at home, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
You're probably still going to have the family, the friends, whatever's going on. You're not in a new environment. It's not going to create that space and time.
The dog will still need walking. The dinner's still going to need cooking. The washing's still going to need to be hung out. The dishwasher's still going to be emptied. Mm-hmm. Because you just get sucked in on that stuff.
Yeah.
So you're right, and I recognise, I recognise I've been privileged to have that. You know, I recognise my privilege in that I was able to afford to go on that, both in terms of time and finance, mm-hmm. Because not everyone can do that. So I'm grateful for that. I guess it's about then if that doesn't work for you, it's about finding that space to enable that to happen.
Yeah. Which is really, really important. So in terms of, we've not really talked about it, is you're a therapist.
Yeah.
Okay, so we only know you on this podcast so far as, Pete Barty, the civil engineer / the guy who's overcome all of this and done all these incredible things. And how did you become a therapist? I assume it's because of the connection that your mental health journey kind of, the way that therapy helped you, but mm-hmm. please, how did that all come about? And with being a therapist.
So I think I mentioned I had a therapist when I had my first kind. I'm pretty sure it was a depression, post-diagnosis, and nothing really happened for a while after that. And I had my number of sessions, and it really helped me in changing my behaviours. But then I just started getting curious about that process. So I read a couple of books and thought this is quite interesting, and I started looking into it in terms of processes and theory and that kind of thing, and then what would it be like to start studying it? So I did an evening course, which led to a day release course, which led to the necessary qualifications, and this took years. To get to a point where I was qualified and able to practice. It involved a lengthy period doing my placement, which you have to do as a student in a cancer charity, small local cancer charity, which I really loved doing as a therapist. And then I qualified and started out in private practice. So I did that 1 or 2 evenings a week. When I could fit it in with the football runs.
Yeah.
And I'm alongside my day job, with a view that I would just keep that going because I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the intellectual stimulation and challenge that gave me, and the fact that I think I was quite good at it. Mm-hmm. The feedback I was getting that I was helping people, and that's a big driver for me right now.
Yeah.
So then when work finished, or when I was medically retired from my work, I was able to do this because I can sit in a chair and talk to people.
Yeah.
I'm able to do that. It's challenging. It's pushes my boundaries at times in terms of my my own abilities, but I love the fact that I can keep learning, and keeping learning something is vital to our mental health as well, to keep this active. And I like that relationship you form with clients. You know, it's not like a friend relationship, but it is a relationship nonetheless. And it is quite, I get a buzz from when people find it of help and benefit, and particularly when we finish, we come to an end, you know, a point where we think the journey's over, and I really like, so far, the feedback I get from them that it's really helped their journey.
That's special, and I think it's really important to have that fulfillment. With I mean, people talk about it in work, but it's really important to be fulfilled in life, and that's kind of the essence that I feel from where you're at with that. So Pete, before we get into the quick fire round, which is going to be fun, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Actually, more than that, just thank you for getting through what you've been, but also thank you for going and realising that to be a human being, you don't have to be a human doing. And I think that's really, really special. And something I'm definitely going to take from today's conversation is, you know, like, get out of the action and get into the more like why and who I am. So thanks, Pete. And how do people find out about you? Where are you? Where do you exist? If they want to send you a message, like
I practice. My practice is on the south coast in Fareham. So my business is findyournorth.co.uk. I'm on as a website, and I'm on social media. I'm not hard to find. I don't hide myself. I'm Pete Barty. You know, you can find me if you put me into most social media engines.
And we'll tag you in the show notes and everything as well. So Pete, let's get to the quick fire round. Let's get to what's going on.
Anything could happen here, couldn't it?
So the way this is going to work is anything could happen. Is I'm going to start a sentence, you're going to finish it, but you don't explain why you finished that sentence the way you have. So essentially, finish a sentence, on to the next one. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So, Pete, life is about
discovering yourself.
What should you do more of?
Saying no.
What should you do less of?
Overthinking.
When do you feel most connected to yourself?
After a moment where I'm buzzing.
Love that. How much of your life, of where you're at right now, is due to luck, and how much of that is due to hard work?
Our very existence is luck.
I love that.
The hard work increases probability. I love that.
If you were to have one government rule and everyone would abide by that government rule, the Pete Barty rule, what would it be and why?
I'm going to go off piste here, because we had this exact same question on the Mississippi with Dave, and Dave gave a classic answer, and I really want to use that, but I'm not going to.
You probably nicked it from this podcast.
You are able to get in any government building, you can sit down and have a cup of tea for free.
I love that. That is so cool. Mental health is
a continual piece of work.
That's so important. So that rounds off our quick fire questions. So Pete, well done. You survived it, mate. Amazing. And I can't believe Dave's been nicking some of my things. I probably stole it from him, to be honest. So maybe, yeah, we won't put that out there. But Pete, we have two questions that we ask every single Tales to Inspire guest. So over 150 people we've asked the same questions to. And these two questions are, Pete Barty, what is your definition of the word inspire?
Planting a seed or a golden nugget within someone that either explodes into action or slowly germinates into a tapping noise that creates change.
I love that. And Pete, if you were to live your most fulfilled life, you got into your 90s, your 100s, and you know, you're looking back and think, man, I really did what I set out to achieve. What is the biggest impact / proudest thing you want to have achieved during your lifetime?
People are kinder to themselves and others with a bit more empathy.
Love that. Well, Pete, thank you so much for being on the Tales Inspired podcast.
Thanks, Chris. That was great fun.
Thank you for watching today's episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please leave a comment in the comment section below, and we cannot wait to see you for our next episode.